Great to have you with us, and thanks so much for joining us. You list throughout the book, but also in the publicity for it, the very many autocracies that exist today. We often think of just China and Russia, but there are many, many more than that. And to what extent do they now almost outnumber the democracies, or is that too much of a stretch? What portion of the world do they cover?
So the book actually describes a particular network of autocracies. So it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and a handful of others, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, who have begun to cooperate. They don't share an ideology. They don't have the same goals. We're talking about communist China, nationalist Russia, Bolivarian socialist Venezuela, theocratic Iran. But they do cooperate kind of transactionally and opportunistically with one another, and they do have a common goal, and they have a common enemy, really, and the enemy is us. The enemy is liberal societies, liberal ideas, the ideas of rule of law, the idea of transparency, and they work together to push back against those ideas, and they do so, and they help one another out in doing so. In addition, there's a whole world of other states that are, some are illiberal, some are dictatorships, but it's really that group that has begun to act more coherently and more concertedly.
Is there any legitimate argument behind why some of these countries are autocracies, or is it purely down to the selfish interests of a few people at the top? Or could you argue that China has made a success of an autocracy over the last couple of decades in a way that perhaps it might not have done if it had been a democracy?
So, I mean, you know, when you talk about successful autocracies, you have to remember that the poorest and most desperate countries on the planet are all autocracies. Zimbabwe, which is a country I write about in the book, is terribly poor. It's a dictatorship. Venezuela, which is a country that was the richest in South America and is now the poorest, is so entirely because of politics and entirely because of bad leadership. You know, the specific reasons why China has succeeded have more to do with the nature of its bureaucracy, also the degree to which it opened up and liberalized what was a very centrally controlled system. You know, the sources of Chinese success, I don't think, lie in the fact of its being a dictatorship. And I think a lot of Chinese have actually been disappointed by the degree to which in recent years China has closed up and begun to cut itself off more from the world, and has also begun to control civil society and debate much more so than people had hoped it would.
Do you think that their success has crossed a critical threshold such that autocracies will always continue to thrive one way or another? China themselves might be able to support others, certainly to support themselves.
Well, China certainly does try to support other autocracies. But look, there is no such thing as historical inevitability. There is no rule. There is no rule that says democracies will survive and succeed, and there is also no rule that says autocracies will survive and succeed, or come to dominate the planet. You know, everything that happens tomorrow depends on what we do today. And my book makes an argument for understanding these developments, taking them seriously, making them part of our foreign policy conversations, but also our domestic conversations. There are many ways in which the autocratic world has influence inside our countries. I talk a lot about kleptocracy, the role of money laundering, the enablers in London and New York and elsewhere who've helped kleptocrats come to power. There are ways we can change our own society that I think would make us more resilient to that kind of influence.
I mean, does the new age in the world of finance make that harder to sort of put the genie back in the bottle, as it were, whether it's cryptocurrencies and other currencies, including the Chinese currency, becoming an alternative to the US dollar, which doesn't then have the same level of ability to control?
Yeah, I mean, the problem really dates back to the 90s when we effectively began to launder money for the post-Soviet world, and then it spread broader. But certainly the task of getting more control over that system is going to be a really important one, both in the U.S. and in Europe and the U.K. over the next decade. I mean, I really think that's going to be one of the tests. You know, can we Can we maintain a regulated or a semi-regulated system that works to the benefit of our people, or will we lose control of it and allow secretive, not just autocrats, but international criminals to dominate the financial markets?
A final question back on China, if I may, not so much about how they govern themselves internally, but the way they interact with the West, and how close they were to sort of signing up meaningfully, genuinely, to Western trade rules and other laws. Was that always an impossibility and something that they were kind of being deceptive about, or was it relatively close? Was TPP an opportunity, for example? Are there opportunities in the future, or is it done and dusted now?
No, so I think that the Chinese, certainly in the 90s, I think there were people both in China and in Russia who did hope that economic integration would lead to political integration, the dream of the 1990s. I think there were people in Moscow and in Beijing who wanted that. I imagine there are people who still do. They're not winning the argument internally, but China in particular has benefited so much from being part of a regulated world trade system, from some elements of the rule of law, that I don't think the argument is ever over. I don't think it's. I think it continues, and that we should continue to try to persuade as much of the planet as possible to be part of a world of rule of law, because it's better for everybody.
Anne, thanks so much for joining us. Fascinating stuff.
Thank you.